What makes a movie fun?
And what makes that different from being good?
Turn up your lights.
And prep your cameras for
Lights, Camera, Chatter! Welcome one, welcome all to the inaugural episode of Lights, Camera, Chatter. Laurel and I are both huge in all sorts of movies, and we thought it'd be fun to dive right in on something that would tell you, our brand new audience, a bit more about who we are. What makes a movie fun?
Hold on, let's establish something before we get in too deep here. The difference between a movie being fun and being good. There's definitely an overlap between the two, but they are not one and the same. Good is down to the quality of production and is often considered objective, or somewhere kind of close to it, whereas fun is all about personal enjoyment and is considered much more subjective.
We make this distinction because we understand that no two people share the exact same opinion, and what we talk about here on Lights, Camera, Chatter is just that, our opinions. You may or may not agree with us, and that's perfectly fine. I know plenty of movies that are by all qualifications good movies, or even great movies, that I find quite boring, and plenty of bad movies that to me are just an absolute blast to watch.
With all that out of the way, let's get to it. I'm starting with Flushed Away, a movie that I think is fun because of my personal connection to it. It was one of my favorite childhood movies that I would beg people to watch every time I was over at my grandparents'. It actually got to the point where my grandparents bought me my own copy to watch at home. Copy I still have on our DVD shelf to this day. Every time I watch it, I feel nostalgic because I remember other memories associated with going to my grandparents, such as baking cookies and making homemade soup, and of course watching Flushed Away together.
I think that the personal connection might be the reason that I struggle with this movie. And let me clarify to our audience, I'm not calling this movie a bad movie by any means. But I first saw it when Laurel showed it to me, and at the time I was 24. So, frankly, I wasn't the target audience, and I didn't have that prior connection because I wasn't a DreamWorks kid. I didn't grow up with these movies. That said, very original concept. Haven't seen anything like it before. Haven't seen anything like it since.
Yeah, true. To be fair, I watched this first when I was like 7 years old. So, I was kind of the target audience at the time. And even then, I still find its sense of humor to be pretty funny.
Fair enough. And being a target audience makes a massive difference, all things considered. We'll talk about this in the second episode, which you and I have already planned, but target audience can heavily influence the way that you perceive a movie that you're watching. If you're not the person it's made for, you may enjoy it, but both statistically and psychologically, you are much less likely to enjoy it. And that is perfectly fine for the record. I'm going to run completely to the other side of the film world here and talk about my favorite movie, which is John Carpenter's The Thing, the 1982 one, not the remake in 2011 with the exact same name. The Thing is, for those who don't know, because it's a little more of a lost time film, a cult classic, if you will, is a science fiction horror from the early 80s. And one thing I really, really like about it is very human characters. And when I say that, I am not requiring the characters to literally be human. I'm saying they are making choices that a person or that anyone in that situation would realistically make. As I said, The Thing is a horror movie. If you've seen it, you know that. And a lot of horror movies have the infamous issue of characters just making horrible choices throughout the entire movie. I'm sure Laurel and myself could both go on for a while about that. But in the meantime, I really appreciated how this was the first horror movie I saw. I first saw it when I was about 17. This was the first one I saw where the characters made not always rational decisions, but realistic ones. They were researchers in an Antarctic database, and every decision made along the way felt like a decision that people in that situation would actually make, which I really appreciated.
I have to agree with you on that. With some other horror films, I'm like, no, don't do that, please. That is a horrible decision. Don't split up. No, don't make out in the bushes. It's a bad idea. You're gonna get chopped up into pieces. But with this movie, they were making decision. They were definitely making decisions that were a lot more realistic. I agree.
And while they weren't always good choices, I think it was more beneficial, one, to character development, and two, to my enjoyment, because, as Laurel just pointed out, I didn't spend half the movie cringing at the decisions the characters made. Even when I didn't agree with the choice they made, because they didn't always make the right choices, there was always a level of, yeah, I could see that being the choice to make in that situation.
Speaking of relatability and horror films, frankly, Radio Silence's Ready or Not has a relatable main character, but also a sense of humor I find to be hilarious. This horror comedy stars Samara Weaving, or Grace, in a life or death game of hide and seek, realizing her in laws suck. The very last line from her, something I can't forget because it's so funny, is her response to emergency personnel at the end of the film. The emergency personnel are like, "What happened to you?" And after a long drag from her cigarettes, Grace responds, "In laws."
I'm going to be totally honest with you, Laurel. The first time I saw that movie, I was genuinely cackling out loud. My roommate was not in the room when I was watching the movie and was deeply confused. Shout out to James if you're listening. One thing that I think makes the movie so funny is that, and anyone who has ever done any form of acting, whether it's theater camp or maybe you're a musical theater kid or you're just messing around with your friends, anyone who's done any sort of comedic acting knows this. It sells best when you, as the actor, are taking it seriously on screen or on stage in the case of a play. And I think that gets accentuated best of all by on Helene's actor, Nikki Guadagni. I hope I said that right. Apologize if I did not. Aunt Helene is the most deadpan and serious character throughout the film. She's also my favorite character throughout the film. Because while she doesn't talk a lot, everything she says is just so thoroughly amusing and entertaining. I also have to give a shout out to, on the other end of the comedic spectrum, Christian Brun, who played Fitch. Again, characters that, if you've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Fitch and Helene are the funniest characters in the whole movie. No one can convince me otherwise. And that's the best of it.
Yeah.
I do also want to throw a shout out to a goof in the DVD subtitles. I don't know if this is an issue on the Blu-ray or 4K versions, but the butler, Stevens, played by John Ralston, sings to himself Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture many times throughout the film, mostly when he is alone. But the reason I draw attention to that is in the subtitles, every single time, it says singing Beethoven.
This is not Beethoven. This is not Beethoven.
And as a classically trained musician, I'd be lying if I said anything other than it drives me insane. But it is thoroughly funny to watch. I'm going to keep the topic on comedy, but I'm going to bring it around to a form of comedy that a lot of people tend to look down upon, but I will be fully upfront in thinking it's hilarious. I could put any Mel Brooks movie here, but I'm going to put my favorite Mel Brooks movie here, which is also one of my favorite comedies ever. And that movie is Spaceballs.
It's a Spaceballs.
For those who are uninitiated, so for those who haven't seen the movie, Spaceballs is, frankly, a lowbrow Star Wars parody by director Mel Brooks, who, among other things, is one of the oldest directors still directing. He's working on another movie right now, and he's, 91, 92, somewhere in there?
Yeah. Apparently there's supposed to be a Spaceballs 2. I'm very excited about that.
If they don't call it The Search for More Money, I will be deeply disappointed. For those who have not seen Spaceballs, that is a joke from the first movie. Or they could do Spaceballs 3, The Search for Spaceballs 2, and they spend the whole movie looking for the second space. It's meta. It's meta humor. The film has meta humor. One of my favorite scenes is a bit where the antagonists of the film, the Spaceballs, are trying to find our heroes. And so they go to their VHS shelf and they pull the movie Spaceballs off the shelf.
Oh my gosh.
And there's a bit about yes, now with new technology, we can watch the movie while it's being made. And they have to fast forward through the movie. They accidentally go too far, and then they're like in the future, and then they rewind and they're in now. So it's like a screen within a screen, and they're just watching themselves stare back at the camera. And then they finally see them. But it's great. Most of my favorite scenes, unfortunately, if I listed them off, this would no longer be a family-friendly podcast because, again, if you know, you know, it is Mel Brooks humor.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
therefore family unfriendly lowbrow humor.
I will say that there are a lot of Star Wars and Star Trek references, which is really funny. Lone Star is very true to being kind of like a combination of Luke Skywalker and Han Solo. Princess Vespa, is kind of like Leia, but like a very spoiled version of Leia. Dark Helmet being Darth Vader. Alternates. And something that I do want to mention is that the characters are all very true to themselves, just as Noah mentioned, like for the previous
and
film.
With that, two things. One, I want to shout out Rick Moranis' performance as Lord Helmet. Lord Helmet, as you can probably imagine, is the Darth Vader analog in this film. And the joke is just that he has a really big helmet. With that said, there's one other scene I want to mention here, just draw some fun to it. And that is the scene where the Spaceballs blackmail the passcode to the air shield out of the druids from Druidia. Don't think too hard about it. Fictional species and all that. Don't think too hard about the names. They're humanoids. It's Spaceballs Tatooine. But my point is, they discovered the passcode to the shield is literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And Lord Helmet makes a comment that's the same passcode an idiot would have on his luggage. Then after they hang up the call, they tell President Scroob, played by Mel Brooks, Scroob is an anagram for Brooks, that the passcode is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in my favorite line in the whole movie, just for its delivery, it goes, "That's amazing! I have the exact same combination on my luggage." So, first off, highly recommend that movie. Cannot recommend it enough. And two, another example of a very different type of humor and comedy as compared to Ready or Not. Alrighty, I think that wraps it up for today, more or less. But this has been a blast, and I look forward to the future of Lights, Camera, Chatter. Real quick, moral of the story. Got anything, Laurel?
Everyone has their own tastes that should be respected. And what I went over today is simply what works best for us.
Sure, close enough. Works for me. Until next time,
this has been
Lights, Camera, Chatter.